The How to Train Your Dragon trilogy is some of the best stuff Dreamworks has ever put out, which is why we aren't too surprised to see that it's getting a live-action reboot. A little surprised, yeah, but not too surprised.
It's okay. I won't hurt you.
Whether you're hyped for it, dreading the eventual live-action Turbo remake, or a little bit of both, we decided now is a perfect time to look back at this timeless trilogy and rank its characters from good to evil. As usual, we'll be starting with the most pure-hearted residents of Berk and beyond and working our way down. These characters are the good. This time around, we've decided the gold medal of good should go to Hiccup. When it came to choosing our most good character, the debate really came down to main character Hiccup or his dad, Stoic, who claimed our gold medal last time around. There's a strong case to be made for both of these guys, but we have to lean towards Hiccup here. While he doesn't take after his macho old man at first glance, don't be fooled. Hiccup is as brave and valiant of a Viking as his father ever was. At first, he's a klutz who tends to risk the village's safety to try and increase his social status by slaying a dragon.
Taking down one of those would definitely get me a girlfriend.
But when he gets the chance to kill a Night Fury, he comes to the realization that he just doesn't like killing things. Hey, to each their own. Despite the intense social pressure, Hiccup did all he could to convince the other Vikings that dragons were kind-hearted and only killed out of self-defense, but this didn't stop him from being a great chief who would risk his life to protect his people. In addition to all of his good qualities, what really keeps Hiccup at the top of our list is the fact that he doesn't really have any huge flaws, morally speaking at least. Like, the worst thing I remember him doing was calling his entire village fat in the first scene of the first movie, and even that was really just a misguided joke.
Yeah, between you and me, the village could do with a little less feeding, don't you think?
At the end of the day, Hiccup is a guy who has all of his father's dedication to his village and all of his mother's devotion to protecting dragons, making him a clear choice for Berk's most noble resident. Taking a very close silver medal of good is Hiccup's father and the departed chief of Berk, Stoic the Vast. If you only watched the first movie, for some reason, you might be surprised to see him so high up because, honestly, first movie Stoic was kind of a jerk. We don't blame him too much for it, mind you. He was raised in a Viking culture where might makes right, and where slaying dragons was necessary for both safety and social status. The guy was constantly under stress, but we still think he tended to go a bit too far with his tough love towards Hiccup. When he found out Hiccup was doing well in his training, his response to the entire village was, I can show my face in public again, haha. Like, who are you, Buck Cluck? Thankfully, despite his parenting flaws, Stoic redeemed himself pretty quickly. In the final act, he apologized to Hiccup for everything and told him he didn't have to fight the Red Death to earn his approval, and in the second movie, shows even more of his good side. He immediately forgives his wife for not returning home, just happy to see her alive again. And when Toothless falls under the control of Drago, Stoic takes a point-blank energy blast to protect Hiccup, losing his life in the process. The Hidden World also revealed a bit more insight into Stoic's personality, with a scene of him talking about finding the dragon's home and sealing it away so that people and dragons wouldn't have to fight anymore.
One day I'll find the hidden world and seal it up.
Sure, he was rough around the edges, but Stoic was always trying to fight for peace in his own blunt, sometimes misguided way. Rounding out our top three, we have Toothless, a character who really needs no introduction. Sure, it understandably takes him a long time to warm up to Hiccup. He starts off being pretty defensive towards both him and even his fellow dragons, showing just how much pressure the poor creatures were under. But once the two become friends, Toothless proves himself to be Hiccup's greatest asset. He basically acted as his wingman to help him get closer to Astrid, basically forcing her to apologize for being harsh with the pair and rewarding her with a romantic ride through the clouds.
Alright, I admit it. This is pretty cool.
He also constantly faces death head-on for the sake of Hiccup and the rest of Berk, from shielding him from the Red Death's explosion in the first movie to challenging the Alpha Dragon in the second. Any bad traits Toothless has really just boil down to him being a dragon with less emotional intelligence than a human, which obviously we aren't really going to take points away from him for. From one iconic dragon to another, next we have Stormfly. Astrid's dragon is a deadly natter, but unless you're a villain, she's more of a regular natter. Like most dragons, Stormfly is basically a gigantic puppy, and I mean that very seriously. In the second movie, when Eret threw one of Hiccup's surrendered weapons away, Stormfly mistook it for a game of fetch and retrieved it right away. Later on, we see that Stormfly is a very devoted friend. This one unwitting game of fetch was apparently reason enough for her to protect Eret from being executed by Drago's men. This one act of kindness is basically what kickstarted Eret's redemption arc in the first place, so we have to give Stormfly a lot of credit for that. Next is one of the biggest dragons around, the gentle giant known as the Crimson Gore Gutter. This big moose dragon was practically made to cause mass property damage, but not on purpose. After being rescued by Hiccup and the gang in the first movie, this guy returned to the favor by rescuing them when Hiccup accidentally led them into Grimmel's trap. Like Stormfly, Crimson's also a very relationship-oriented guy, shown by how he immediately went up to bat for fish meat in the final battle.
I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Speaking of which, now it's time to talk about fish meat. So how do we describe him? Yeah, honestly, I don't know that there's much more to say about him. He's a baby dragon who basically just helps out when he feels like it. Really, the same can be said for all the baby dragons, specifically the group Hiccup and company used to help defeat Drago and save both mankind and dragonkind. They aren't exactly the best listeners, sure, but they were there when the gang needed them most. Okay, how about one last dragon for now? Time to talk about Meatlug, Fishlegs' Gronkle and the mother of Fishmeat, which, you're gonna ignore how Fishlegs combined their names to name the baby. That questionable detail aside, Meatlug is as helpful as any other dragon. Being a warrior's dragon and being a mother can't be an easy combo, so we have to give her some credit. That said, letting her baby be taken into war zones on a regular basis is a pretty questionable parenting decision, to say the least.
Couldn't find a sitter.
We've talked about the chief already, so now let's talk about his comic relief best friend, Gobber. If there was ever a character in this series who embodied, he a little confused, but he got the right spirit, it's Gobber. Gobber is as supportive and caring as can be. He just isn't always the best at choosing his words carefully. What Gobber might mean as encouragement for Hiccup to stop trying to be something he's not could come out as him saying, "Hey, literally everything about you is wrong, okay?
You need to stop all this."
He can be insensitive and even paranoid, but that doesn't stop him from being a good guy who's just as willing to risk his neck for his people as Stoic. The worst we could say about him, aside from being a bit tone-deaf, would be the dangerous Viking training Gobber puts teenage kids through. But in his defense, slaying dragons was known as a necessary evil for them until Hiccup changed their minds, so we can't take too many points away from him for that. Up next is the other half of Hiccup's own, sorta enemies to lovers arc, Astrid. Hiccup's unpopularity became even more obvious when he started Viking training, but while his other training partners just constantly teased him, except Fishlegs, he was usually chill, Astrid was only harsh with Hiccup at first because she took the people's fight against dragons very seriously. This did lead to her having a bit of an ego, however, and when Hiccup started beating her in training, she grew even more resentful to the point of borderline stalking him to figure out his secret. We have to give Astrid the Envy Sinner medal for that. But she more than makes up for that with her loyalty to Hiccup. The two quickly became friends, and more later on, when Toothless gave them a ride through the clouds and even led them straight to the dragon's hideout. Despite how important slaying dragons was to her, Astrid stayed true to her word to keep the hideout's location a secret until Hiccup figured out how to best address the situation. Whenever Hiccup is discouraged, she's close behind to encourage him to keep doing stupid, dangerous stuff for the sake of Burke.
That's the Hiccup I know.
Her loyalty and leadership skills, alongside her willingness to change, make Astrid a worthy candidate for a high spot on our list. Next up is the yin to Toothless's yang, Light Fury. This rare beauty was the only dragon Hiccup and the gang left from their raid on Ragnar's dragon trapping crew, and unfortunately for the former group, she was the key to their plan to kidnap Toothless. Much like Toothless in the first movie, Light Fury starts out much more cold and distant than she'd later become. Like, I'm pretty sure she tried to drop him in the ocean at one point. I guess we can defend her with the whole she's just being defensive thing, which is fair, and she did save both Toothless and Hiccup's lives at the end of the movie, so I'd say she earned her hero status. Now let's give a quick mention to the village elder, Gothi. She's one of the very few Burkians outside of the main few to get any focus in the story, and even then it's really just her silently doing elder stuff, like proclaiming the winner in a competition. She's beloved by all the village for her constant support though, so as mysterious as she is, we think Gothi deserves a spot in the good category. Now let's talk about a guy who likes talking a lot more than Gothi does. Fishlegs is basically the recon guy of Hiccup's team. This guy is a total nerd when it comes to dragons, and we mean that in the best possible way. If you need information on a specific kind of dragon, whether it's basic identification or combat strategy, Fishlegs is your guy.
I've read it like 7 times.
He's also the only one of Hiccup's classmates who never really goes out of his way to be mean to him, probably because they tend to ice him out a lot too. But alongside being intelligent and kind, Fishlegs earns a lot of points for being a total softie, particularly when it comes to Meatlug's baby dragon, Fishmeat, who he brought to battle despite the inconvenience because he couldn't find a sitter for him. Fishlegs is a bit of a goofy name, so let's go to the other end of the naming spectrum with Skull Crusher, Stoic's dragon. Much like Stoic himself, Skull Crusher is protective and relentless, more than willing to protect others with his very life. Despite Stoic initially hating dragons more than anyone, Skull Crusher won him over enough to become a good friend and ally, helping him track down Hiccup after he'd run off to find Drago in the second movie. Skull Crusher is also very forgiving, shown by him accepting Eret as his new rider after his reform. Following Skull Crusher is Cloud Jumper, Valka's dragon. As imposing as he may look at first, Cloud Jumper is as kind-hearted as any dragon. In one scene, he scarfed down a huge pile of food meant for himself and Toothless, but after noticing that Toothless was also existent, he decided to share some with him. Gross? Yeah. Kind? Also yeah. Nearing the end of the good category, we have Grumpy, Gobber's pet dragon. Look, you get the picture by now with dragons, surely. They're peaceful creatures who only attack when it's necessary, and that can be said for Grumpy too, of course. That said, we have to give him the Sloth Sinner medal for his tendency to let the forge die down in Gobber's workshop. I guess lazy wasn't as catchy a name, huh? Now, you'll want to talk about a really clever dragon name? Look no further than the Bewildebeest. Valka's time among the dragons led her to this majestic giant of a creature. The Bewildebeest is known as the Alpha Dragon, basically, until Toothless came along, that is, and it both controls and protects the dragons that submit to it. There isn't much else to say about the big guy, except that he could be using those gigantic dragon powers to do much worse, as we'll be seeing later on. Without further ado, it's time to close out our good category with that good old son of an Eret. Eret was a skilled dragon trapper who'd presumably made a pretty decent name for himself, seeing as how Drago Bloodvis himself trusted him to deliver a good haul to him. Well, less trusted and more demanded. In defense of Eret's ruthlessness in dragon napping, Drago would torture or kill him, maybe both, if he didn't succeed in dragon deliveries. He was already branded by the guy once, and in his own words, Drago promised to be much less understanding in the future. Nevertheless, Eret ultimately redeemed himself after Stormfly got captured trying to protect him.
Now let me return the favor.
While he didn't have much of a choice, when his and Astrid's lives were threatened, he managed to fight off Drago's men and save both themselves and their dragons. And this was after Astrid held him hostage, mind you. In the end, Eret takes care of Skullcrusher after Stoic's passing and works alongside Berk to protect people and dragons from the monsters who would use them to further their own nefarious plans. With that redemption arc closed, it's time to move into something of a foggier section. This is the gray area. This might be a bit of a shock, but we're placing Hiccup's mother, Valka, in the gray area. I know, how is she this low on our list, right? Hiccup got his passion for peacekeeping from Valka. After all, despite the unpopularity of the sentiment, Valka was determined to try and reconcile people and dragons. She was fully convinced of their kindness when she witnessed a dragon innocently playing with baby Hiccup. That was before Stoic rushed in to protect his son from what he thought was a threat, startling the poor creature in the process. This led to Valka running away from her village and starting a new life among the dragons.
I've lived among them for 20 years.
Which gives us kind of a moral dilemma. On one hand, sure, Valka would go to bat for dragons any day. She knew they were peaceful deep down and just wanted people to listen to her. When even her husband wouldn't do that, of course she'd be devastated. That being said, this is no excuse for her to straight up abandon her family. She let her husband believe she was dead for 20 years, leaving him to rule Berk on his own for decades and being absent from her son's life until his early adulthood. Had she not happened to run into Hiccup in the second movie, she would have just kept this lie up forever, and that's a deed bad enough for us to place her in the gray by default. Still, dragons of all kind can trust Valka, like hobgoblins. These little guys are supposedly bad omens, to the point where Gobber was convinced that Berk was cursed the moment they showed up.
They're a bad omen. We're cursed.
They are pretty chaotic, but bad omen might just be a bit of a stretch. During the final battle with Grimmel, they came to Gobber's rescue by jumping Ragnar at the last second. We'll settle for calling them morally gray omens for now. Up next, we have a triple entry, Barf, Belch, and Hookfang. We're ranking these three together because they're the dragons belonging to Roughnut, Toughnut, and Snotlout. As such, they more or less share their riders' characteristics. Barf and Belch are chaotic, neutral, incarnate, often bickering with each other in otherwise intense situations and taking a little too much pleasure in the destruction they cause. Hookfang may not have a second head to bicker with, but with the ability to set himself on fire, he has even more destructive potential. Even so, like most dragons, they're more than happy to protect both humans and dragons, and are more so a product of their environment than anything else. With that out of the way, it's probably no surprise that Snotlout is up next. Snotlout isn't a bad guy, per se. He has his good qualities, like being willing to help Hiccup rescue dragons and humans alike, not to mention having a hidden soft side. We saw you wipe your tear when Stoic died, Snotlout, and trust me, you weren't the only one, but unfortunately Snotlout is one of those guys who's more concerned with social status than altruism. He was a total jerk to Hiccup until he started doing better than everyone else in training, and even then, Snotlout only seems to come around because it seemed like the popular thing to do. Being so full of himself earns Snotlout the Pride Center medal. Still, he definitely does the least amount of bad stuff out of the class bullies, so we can't place him any lower. Toughnut is up next. Like most of the group, Toughnut is generally a bully to Hiccup at first, and that cruelty can sometimes extend to the others. When he finds out that Roughnut has been captured by Grimmel, he says, and I quote, "I feel what Roughnut is every day. Dumb." Like, bro, she could be dead!
If they're stuck with Roughnut, I'm more worried about them.
His only real saving grace is the fact that he's the most willing to stick with Hiccup as chief. He inexplicably starts acting as his wingman halfway through the third movie and is usually the first one to express his approval of whatever plan he cooks up. As relentless as his teasing is, Toughnut isn't heartless. He's just kind of a jerk. Rounding out the gray area is his twin, Roughnut. Again, probably not surprising. Roughnut is one of the biggest menaces in the franchise, even on her best day. When Snotlout and Fishlegs were competing for her affection for some reason, she went from using the opportunity to bully them, even burying Snotlout at one point, to relishing in their constant obsessing over her.
All the boys love me.
Also, we're going to give her the Lust Sinner medal for her brief crush on Eret. Like, I need you guys to understand that this girl is so down bad that she was willing to let herself be abducted by him. In the third movie, after she'd moved on, on, she was once again kidnapped by Grimmel, who let her go because she was just that irritating. This girl will risk entire operations for any guy she shows a hint of interest in, but honestly, she's just too funny to not like regardless. While she isn't bad by any means, she doesn't really have a lot of good attributes that aren't shared by any other Burkians at large, so we have to call Ruffnut the least heroic of the non-villainous characters. With that, it's time to trip into the darkest depths of Burke's character repertoire. These are the bad to evil. First up in this category is Ragnar the Rock, which I have to say is easily the most clever Viking name in the series, and that's saying something. Unfortunately, a clever name does not make a good man. Ragnar may be playful at times, but as one of Drago's men, he's ruthless when it comes to trapping dragons to use for world conquest. He isn't opposed to hurting people who might get in his way either, whether they're dragon tamers or just people who happen to get caught in the crossfire. That said, Ragnar wasn't all bad. The whole reason he was taken down was because he got distracted by one of the hobgoblers' cuteness.
Oh, cute.
If he somehow survived that onslaught, maybe he could open up a hobgobbler orphanage. I'm sure there's money to be had in that, right? At number 5, we have the first seemingly evil species of dragon, the Death Grippers. These are dragon-killing dragons, essentially. Now, to be fair, in Grimmel's own words, they were drugged into obedience with their own venom, and as a result, we don't really know whether they have a choice to be good or not. All we see of them is their utilization as war machines in Grimmel's schemes, which isn't the best first impression, frankly. Still, there are dragons who sink even lower than them, and in the case of Drago's Bewildebeest, I mean that literally. Like the Death Grippers, this big dude isn't fully in control of his actions. Rather, he's subservient to whomever the Alpha is. It just happens that this beast's Alpha is a ruthless warlord who wants to rule the world with a malicious dragon army. In what was honestly a hilarious defeat when you think about it, when Toothless took over as Alpha Dragon, Drago's right-hand dragon was just like, "Hey, my bad, bro," and went down to the depths of the ocean, which I would assume drowned Drago in the process. Not a great track record by any means, but the villains who were fully acting on their own deserve more scrutiny. Enter our bronze medalist of evil, the Red Death. Okay, right off the bat, Red Death has the audacity to be named Red Death when he's very clearly more gray than red. But jokes aside, he's also got the audacity to force every dragon under his control to bring it regular food tributes, presumably because it's just too lazy to do so himself. We're giving this guy the Gluttony and Greed Sinner medals for that, and if it weren't for Grumpy's subpar work performance, he'd get the Sloth medal too. If Red Death were just trying to eat, we could defend it somewhat, but the fact is that it has its underlings do all the hunting for it and will straight up eat them if they don't bring enough food. Taking home the silver medal of evil is Grimmel the Grizzly, and I'll be honest, it was really difficult to decide which of the top two was worse. To be completely honest, Grimmel has less in the way of redeeming qualities, which is to say that he has none. He's responsible for the genocide of every Night Fury except for Toothless and Light Fury, and is so renowned for his dragon-slaying prowess that he's hired by Ragnar to retrieve Toothless. He's basically a large-scale medieval poacher who sinks as low as to brainwash dragons himself so he can use them to kill the other dragons. He used the dragons to destroy the dragons, basically.
Allow me to demonstrate.
What's more, much like the Trappers, he isn't opposed to killing people if they get in his way. I could see a case for him being considered the most evil, but, well, here's the thing. Grimmel doesn't have any overtly good qualities, but he also doesn't have a huge plan beyond being renowned for his, put this one in quotations, heroism? But first, this video is brought to you by Wicked Binge channel memberships. You can gain access to our videos early before anyone else, plus gain access to members-only emojis and loyalty badges by supporting the channel through a membership. On the other hand, while this may be divisive, we're giving our gold medal of evil to Drago Bloodfist. Right off the bat, Drago is more sympathetic than Grimmel. He actually has a reason for his crimes, having lost his family and village in a dragon attack. Now he travels the world, taking control of dragons as a true alpha male, trademark, using his power to control everyone willing to follow him via intimidation and torture, and to kill anyone who resists him. Without hesitation, he killed all of Stoic's friends when they met for the crime of not letting him become their supreme ruler in exchange for protection, and that's far from his only display of cruelty. From attempting to kill Eret despite his effort to be loyal to him, to not even hesitating for a second when he saw that Valka was a woman. But hey, losing everything and everyone you love does things to you, right? Well, yeah, but for Eret, all it did was give him an excuse. When he opens up about his tragic backstory to Hiccup, the latter calls him out on his hypocrisy, and Drago doesn't even try to argue with him. He just straight up admits that he's only doing it for power at this point. There's not a hint of remorse in his eyes at any point, nor is there a single fully sympathetic quality. This guy takes genuine pleasure in enslaving dragons to murder people, all for the sake of world domination. I'm not defending Grimmel, but in comparison to Drago, he was just an evil jerk who liked hunting. Drago had more bloodlust, more malicious intent, and more overall evil than any other villain in this cast, by a long shot. So we can't give anyone else our gold medal of evil.